Welcome to This Explainer. Let's jump right into a fundamental truth about survival in business. Change is absolutely inevitable. But here's the catch. We all know most companies struggle to pull it off without completely wrecking team morale or causing massive disruptions along the way. So today, we're unpacking the real anatomy of organizational change. We're going to explore the core principles, why we as humans naturally resist it, and exactly how you can engineer success rather than just frantically reacting to chaos.
Here is our roadmap for today. First, the concept and drivers of change. Second, the types and levels of change. Third, the psychology behind resistance. Fourth, strategies to overcome that resistance. And finally, we'll dive into a massive case study on engineering change in the telecom sector.
All right, part one, the concept and drivers of change.
Now, organizational change isn't just about random pivoting or reacting in a panic when things go wrong. It's actually a directed, highly intentional, and conscious effort. Think of it as a strategic leap from where you are now to a much more capable problem-solving state. It takes real leadership and a total commitment to finding a better way to operate.
So, what actually drives this conscious effort? Well, it usually comes down to two massive forces that are constantly putting pressure on an organization. On one hand, you've got external pressures. We're talking rapid tech advancements, fierce new competitors, or major economic shifts. But on the other hand, you've got internal forces, right? Things like changing employee values, outdated processes, or just a downright dysfunctional organizational structure.
You're essentially caught in a vice grip between the two. Think about it. If your market is innovating with cutting-edge tech, but your internal operations are still bogged down by some archaic paperwork process, that friction is the absolute catalyst for change. You literally have to adapt just to survive.
Moving on to part two, the types and levels of change.
The crucial distinction to make here is between material change and moral change. Material, or a structural change, is all the physical stuff. You know, it's buying state-of-the-art servers, restructuring a department, rolling out a new software platform. But moral or psychological change, that is way deeper. That means upgrading the actual mindset, the daily behaviors, and the core culture of the people actually using those tools.
And this brings us to the trap of what we call partial change. Look, having modern tech means absolutely nothing if your organizational mindset is still stuck in the 1980s. If you buy everyone a brand new computer but still demand paper signatures and triplicate, you haven't actually changed a thing. True evolution requires you to have both the material upgrades and the psychological buy-in from your team.
Which leads us perfectly into part three, the psychology of resistance to change.
Let me ask you this directly. Have you ever dragged your feet on a new software rollout or a sweeping company policy? I know I have for sure. We usually view this kind of resistance as a roadblock, right? Just stubbornness that management needs to crush. But what if we reframe that? What if resistance isn't the enemy, but just a completely natural human reaction?
When you look at it that way, resistance is actually an incredibly healthy diagnostic tool. It's like a check engine light. When your team pushes back, it forces leadership to actually justify their plans. It exposes glaring flaws in how things were communicated. Honestly, resistance is basically your team saying, hey, we don't get the why behind this. It practically forces a deeper analysis before you go out and make a hugely expensive mistake.
So why does the pushback happen in the first place? Well, people resist because of a very human fear of the unknown. We cling to our habits because, let's face it, habits feel safe. Or, quite rationally, people perceive a real threat to their job security or their acquired status. If you want to manage change, understanding this underlying psychology is absolutely critical.
All right, let's get into part four, strategies to overcome that resistance. Here's your management toolkit. You always want to start at the top with education and communication. If ignorance is the enemy of change, education is the cure. Next up is participation. Simply put, if your team helps build the process, they aren't going to break it. You offer support. You offer training. If needed, you sit down and negotiate. But then, there is coercion. Implicit or explicit force. And guys, this is the absolute last resort. You only use it when speed is critical and the company's survival is literally on the line. It gets fast results, sure, but it will severely damage your long-term trust.
Part 5. Engineering Change. Let's look at a fascinating telecommunications case study to see this in action.
1,650,000. I want you to appreciate the staggering scale of this project.
This Syrian telecom institution needed to expand their infrastructure from just 400,000 lines in 1993 to a massive 1.65 million lines by 2002. And they had to entirely modernize their services to include digital networks and data transmission right at the dawn of the internet age. Just a huge, huge undertaking.
Now, to handle explosive growth like that, they didn't just rush in with some top-down mandate. Look at this timeline. They spent from late 1997 all the way to early 1999, over a full year, just in the preparation phase. They hosted seminars, they internally marketed the idea, and they educated their staff. They built up awareness to lower that psychological resistance before the official implementation phase even kicked off.
And when they finally did hit go, where do you think they started? They correctly identified that to transform the entire organization, they had to start by completely re-engineering the administrative core, the human resources and legal departments. Because if the core of your company is bogged down with red tape and bureaucracy, the rest of the organization literally cannot innovate. They took some really smart, highly specific steps. They ran intensive seminars on total quality management. They updated out-of-date job descriptions to match what people were actually doing day to day. They physically trained their staff to transition from dusty paper files to digital archiving on PCs, and they drafted a brand new internal quality system to meet strict international ISO 9002 requirements. They were literally re-engineering the daily habits of their foundational staff.
I absolutely love the motto they adopted during this project. What we change today needs developing tomorrow, and what we develop today needs updating tomorrow. It's such a powerful mindset. It shows how they shifted quality from being this rigid set of boring rules into a daily, continuous behavior. Change wasn't just a destination they were trying to reach, it became their new, permanent state of being.
But to sustain that momentum, human resources itself had to evolve. They had to completely shift their evaluation system. So instead of just promoting people based on seniority or, how well they followed routine instructions, they started basing promotions on new skills, problem solving, teamwork. They shifted the whole focus from just measuring activities to measuring actual results, which ultimately built a massive culture of trust and self-management.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. The real anatomy of change proves that you can't just throw money at new technology and expect a revolution. You have to communicate relentlessly, you have to actually expect and utilize that human resistance, and you have to deliberately re-engineer your core culture. So, I'll leave you with this question to ask yourself and your team today. Will your organization merely react to the shifting landscape and just hope for the best, or will it proactively engineer its own evolution? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep engineering that success.